Hello everybody out there in the bookverse, it's Stephanie, and today I am back with my February wrap-up. So if you remember, TBR Starhop was not particularly nice to me in the month of February. I had a pretty hefty TBR, and as you have probably seen in my last video for my March TBR, I was not able to finish all the books on my TBR, but I feel like I did a pretty decent job in all reality. I got through quite a few books, and I also have two books that I am going to talk about that were on my January TBR that I just finished towards the end of the month of January, so they didn't make it into my January wrap-up. I filmed too early in order to get those in, but I'll go ahead and talk about them in this wrap-up instead. First one I'm going to mention is Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. I finished this one in January, very end of January, and I loved it. I absolutely adored this book. It was so much fun. It was so entertaining, and I just was along for the ride. I didn't want to put this book down, and I just wanted to bust through it, which is pretty much what I did. In all reality, I read this book very quickly. This is an adult high fantasy book, which is currently a standalone, and I think Brandon Sanderson has said that he would like to write more within this world, but he hasn't yet. And we are following multiple POVs within this world, and there is this city, kind of country that's based in the city that has taken over and conquered a lot of other countries or regions around them. And there is this one little group of people left who has the legitimate royalty to the throne of this land, and they are marrying off one of their daughters to the god king of these conquerors. So that's very basic explanation of what is going on within this world, but there is such an interesting magic system as well that kind of has to do with a person's breath or their soul, kind of their innate magical ability that they are born with, and the more of those breaths that you get, the more powerful and more magical things you are able to accomplish. It also has to do with colors and the different senses, and it's very fascinating learning about this magic. I was really intrigued with the different nuances of it that they brought into this book. I really enjoyed the characters in here. There was this very cute romance that I know other people have said they really enjoy as well, but I just didn't expect to love it as much as I did. I do enjoy the romance in some of Brandon Sanderson's books, but I just felt like this one was so sweet and adorable, and I absolutely loved it. I liked the political intrigue going on here. I love the twists that happened. I just had so much fun reading this book. If you haven't read any Brandon Sanderson, I would say this is a very good place to start because it gives you a very good idea of his writing style and the way that he develops his worlds while being a standalone, and it's also not like as long as Stormlight Archive or something. So if you want to jump into a little bit of Sanderson, I think Warbreaker is a great place to start. Next book that I finished in January but didn't make it onto my January wrap-up was The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. This was a channel read-along that I have been hosting. If you didn't see on the Discord though, it has been pushed back a little bit because the release of the fourth book was pushed back until June. So we are now going to be reading the next 3 books in the series, giving them 2 months each, which is kind of nice because they're pretty chunky. So this first installment in Ken Liu's Dandelion Dynasty was a trip. It was a very interesting and unique world. I think that the way he wrote this had a lot of very unique aspects to it. His writing style was very different from anything that I had ever read before, and I found that I really enjoyed it to an extent. So the way that he wrote this book felt very much like it was a told story, almost like we had someone that was a little more outside of the characters telling the story to us, which in my opinion lent more towards me not being as invested in these characters. I didn't feel like I had as much emotional attachment to these characters as I do in a lot of books that I have read, but it was also a very interesting way to go about it because I did like the feel and the cadence to the storytelling since he did it that way. It was very fast paced. So there was so much happening within this book. There were years of battles and like this rebellion and so many political things occurring within this book that it felt like I was reading an entire series in one installment. So it just jumped from thing to thing to thing to thing, and we had so much going on, so much happening. It was a little much, I think. I feel like a little too much was crammed into one book. While I did enjoy the story, and I found it very interesting to just kind of zip through years of political maneuverings and war and all of these things, it just could have been extended a little bit, in my opinion. I did definitely enjoy the world building, and I think the craftiness of some of the characters was one of my most enjoyable parts of this. The creativity within this war was a lot of fun for me. I did enjoy the gods aspect of it, and I'm really interested to see where that goes in the rest of this series. I've heard this one described as a prologue to the rest of the series, so almost like this sets up the trilogy that is to come. Almost. I don't know how accurate that is because I haven't read any of the rest of the books, but that's kind of what I have heard. So I am really looking forward to moving on with this series. I did enjoy it a lot. It's very historical, political, military, and the fantasy aspect of it is quite minimal. So there's really not a whole ton of magic and that type of thing happening in here. It is a completely fictional world. These countries don't really exist, but I believe that Ken Liu pulled inspiration quite heavily from historical events. But overall, I really did enjoy this book. I'm looking forward to continuing on with this series. I think this was an interesting introduction to this series and this world, and I'm interested to see where we go from here. I feel like this series has a lot of potential. The next books I'm going to talk about were pretty huge disappointments, but I knew that going into them, and that is City of Dragons and Blood of Dragons by Robin Hobb. These are the final two books within her Rainwild Chronicles series, which is set in her realm of the Elderlings. In this one, we are obviously in the Rainwilds. We are with dragons. It is definitely a different feel from the rest of her series. As I kind of go on reading it, it has the feel of almost a teen CW drama to it. Maybe that's just me and my feelings about it, but it just has a lot of those dramatic, soapy aspects. It is very much centered on relationships and mating and those types of things. It wasn't what I wanted out of this series. In all reality, this isn't what I have come to expect from Robin Hobb's writing, so I really didn't love it all that much. I think that Blood of Dragons did step it up quite a bit to the point that it was like 3 stars, but like a solid 3 stars for me. But it was good to read it. We learned a lot. There were some important things that happened within this series that you wouldn't have really understood if you would have skipped it, I don't think. So I am glad that I read it. I just don't think I will ever be rereading this series. I am very sure that I will reread Robin Hobb's Realm of the Elderlings, but I'll probably be skipping this one. So yeah. The next book was the Top Shelf Society book club pick for the month of February, and that is The Beautiful Ones by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. This book is a fantasy that has very historical vibes to it. It has a historical atmosphere, this kind of coming out into society, finding a husband, and following the like societal rules and that type of feeling to it, with like balls and parties and all those things that go along with it. And I really enjoyed this book. I had so much fun with it. It's interesting because I think it had some very strong Great Gatsby vibes to it, but I hated The Great Gatsby and I loved this book. So I would classify this book predominantly as a romance, not as a fantasy. So go into it with that in mind. I thought that our main character was a very interesting person to follow. She was very nuanced and different, and I really enjoyed reading from her perspective. I think they did a really good job of having her be like not like other girls without making it so obnoxious and annoying. I thought she was quirky and fun, and I did enjoy reading from her perspective. It is multiple POV, so we do get perspectives of other characters within this story, and I really love that a lot. I was definitely rooting for our main main romantic couple, and I had a trope that's used in here that I did not love, and I would have enjoyed this book more if that wouldn't have been present. But overall, this was a ton of fun. I would highly recommend this book. It's fun. I feel like it was fast-paced. I read it in a day and it was really enjoyable and I never was bored. I thought that I did do audiobook and reading physically, a little of both, and I thought the audiobook was really well done as well, so I recommend that. I really enjoyed both of Sylvia Moreno Garcia's books that I have read, so I will definitely be picking up more from her. But yeah, The Beautiful Ones was a great kind of palate cleanser between some heavier like fantasy and sci-fis. This next one was the Cosmere Unbounded read-along book for the month of February, and that is Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. Oh, this book was so much fun. I really enjoyed it a lot. I have heard a lot of people say that Elantris is Brandon Sanderson's weakest book within his Cosmere and that they don't enjoy it as much. I do know that it is his first published work within the Cosmere, but I liked it. I had so much fun reading this book. I thought that the characters were extremely well done, well executed. I liked the magic system in here. I thought that that was really interesting, very fascinating how it was so scientifically based, and that was so fun to learn about. I think Brandon Sanderson does that really well in his books. He does create very intricate and detailed magic systems that have rules, and you can very much learn about them like science. The main premise of this book is that we have this princess from another country who is coming to marry the prince of a neighboring country to secure an alliance, but he dies while she is en route. And we have this city called Elantris that is essentially a city of zombies that used to be this magnificent magical city. It was really fun to learn more about this as we went along. There was also a very strong religious aspect to it, so know that going in. There is this very religiously zealous character in here who is here to convert this country, and I thought that his part was extremely well executed. I hated reading from his perspective at times, but I thought it was really well done. The development from that end was very interesting to watch, and overall this was just a great time. I liked the twists, I liked the characters, I liked the magic system and the world, and all of it was just so much fun to read about. I did take quite a bit of time to read this book. I don't know why. I just didn't feel as drawn to continue with it, even though I really enjoyed it and loved it. But yeah, Elantris was a lot of fun. I don't think it's his weakest. I think this is excellent. And I also, like I said about Warbreaker, this would also be a good place to start with Brandon Sanderson if you are interested in getting into his Cosmere, but you don't want to commit to a huge series. Next book I'm going to talk about is the only non-fantasy book on this list, and that is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. This is a sci-fi book, and this is by the same author of The Martian and Artemis, and this book is about a man who wakes up in space, but he can't remember what he's doing there. This book had a very similar feel to The Martian, so if you enjoyed Andy Weir's writing style in The Martian, I think you would really love this one as well. He has a very witty, funny, likable character who is our main guy that we're following. He has the same type of humor within this, I feel like, and this character is very reminiscent of what's his name, like Watson, is that? I think that's his name, the main character in The Martian. It is very scientific and you get a lot of science within this story, but I feel like you can almost ignore a little bit of that. Like if you aren't really understanding what's going on, you can read that and then he'll explain why that's important. So you don't necessarily have to understand all the science that you're reading in here, because I know that can sometimes be overwhelming within sci-fi books, but this book was so much fun. I just loved it. I loved reading from this guy's perspective. Gosh, I don't even remember his name at this point. Ryland Grace. I just think he was such a fun character, just the same as I love the character from The Martian. I think that Andy Weir makes the sci-fi very accessible and easy for anyone to get into and to read. So if you are new to sci-fi, I think this is a great place to start. It is a very compelling read. It makes you want to continue and figure out what is going on. That's a very big part of this, is like, one, figuring out what is happening and why he is there, and also how he is going to succeed in his mission. There is a really fun twist within this book that I was unfortunately spoiled for. Thank you, booktubers who don't put spoiler warnings on things, but if you didn't know going in, that would be such an interesting and a really fun, exciting part of the book. So I would say go into this with as little knowledge as possible, because I think that would be the best experience reading this book. Overall, I love this. I thought it was extremely well done, well written, fast-paced, just great overall time, and I would highly recommend it. Next, I have The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. I am reading this book in preparation for reading the Lord of the Rings series. I'm going to be reading The Fellowship of the Ring with Abby and everyone over at Shelf Space for the month of March, because I am a co-host for the Shelf Space book club. So I wanted to read The Hobbit before jumping back into the rest of the Lord of the Rings, and I was so glad that I did. This was my Patreon buddy read for the month of February, and it was so much fun. I haven't been back into this world since I was in elementary school, which is when I first read this series, and I loved it. It was amazing. It was just so nostalgic to jump back into this world, and I read physically and listened to the audiobook, and there is a new audiobook narrated by Andy Serkis. It is available on Scribd, but I think you can also get it on Audible if you would like to, and it was excellently done. If you don't know, Andy Serkis is Gollum in the actual Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit series movies, and he did the voices of everyone in this so well, and he did them like the movies, which I think was definitely a different experience, obviously, than when I first read it, because the Hobbit movies hadn't come out, but it was so fun, and it like doubled the nostalgia of this book for me, because I absolutely love the movies, the Lord of the Rings movies at least. The Hobbit I love and don't love, but the narration really gave it that extra little depth. He did Gollum's voice obviously perfectly, and Bilbo sounded like the Bilbo actor, Gandalf sounded like Gandalf. It was all just so much fun, so I'd highly recommend that audiobook if you're going to go that route. But overall, I can't say anything bad about this. I feel like this time reading through, I did feel the middle gradeness of this more than I did the first time, which would make sense because I read it when I was in the age range of middle grade, so I wouldn't pick up on that quite as much. But definitely reading it this time, I felt how this is more a story for younger people or children, but I loved it so much as an adult. This is an excellent middle grade for adults to read. It is so well done. I love the characters. I love the world. It was really fast-paced too. It jumped from huge event to huge event quite quickly, and we had a lot of very big things happen within each chapter. It felt like each chapter had its own huge big event that was going on, and I had so much fun with that. So overall, yes, I absolutely adore this book. I would highly recommend it. It's like a staple to the fantasy genre, and even if you don't like J.R.R. Tolkien's writing style in The Lord of the Rings, this one is different and much easier to get through. So I would recommend trying this one out, even if you didn't like The Lord of the Rings. And there are two books that I read for my TBR mini readathon that I did. The first book being Sunreached by Brandon Sanderson. This is the first novella that he wrote within this Skyward world, and this novella comes after the second book but before the third book. So after Starsight but before Cytonic, if you want to read them in order. This one followed FM. It was from her perspective, and we're getting a lot of what is happening back on Detritus while the things on Starsight are occurring. So we get a lot of this background story that I think is going to be really important for when we jump back into the fourth book, so he doesn't have to do as much like background work trying to establish what happened. We already know it from these novellas, so I'd say they're probably pretty essential to read, but you don't necessarily necessarily have to read them before Cytonic if you don't want to. I really enjoyed this. I think there was a lot of fun things introduced. It definitely had a little bit of a different feel to it than the rest of the books within the series, and it's probably because it was from FM's perspective instead of Spence's, because Spence is very unique and different. But it was a lot of fun, and I would highly recommend reading it. The other book that I read for that readathon was Over the Garden Wall. This is a graphic novel. I only read the first volume, and I'm gonna be honest, I really don't know what I read about. It was very disjointed and odd, and it felt like it was in two parts that were completely not connected and had nothing to do with each other. The first one was very whimsical. We were following this child as he was almost in this dream world going through these very bizarre things. And then the second one, we're following this girl who was alone in her cabin. Her father and mother had left, father had left, mother had died, and she was like talking to her mother in a mirror as she was just alone in this cabin. And it really felt like they didn't go together whatsoever, and I'm very confused why they were together. I didn't really love it, and I'm probably not going to be continuing on with that series, but I needed something short to read for the readathon, and that caught my eye. But unfortunately, it wasn't my favorite. And I do have two books that I have already started, and I think I will probably be able to finish both of them before the end of February, and that is In My Dreams I Hold a Knife and Master of Sorrows. These two I will talk about in my March wrap-up. I will add them onto there, but so far enjoying both of them. I mean, obviously I already know I love Master of Sorrows, and In My Dreams I Hold a Knife. Enjoying, intrigued, not 100% loving it though, but we'll see how it goes. And those are the books that I read in the month of February. So far, I finished 8 books in February, which I feel like is really good considering I have a lot going on in life, especially during that month. I had a lot of things that were happening. But let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these books, what you think of them, what was your favorite read for the month of February. And as always, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and you want to see more from me, hit the subscribe button down below and the bell icon so you'll be notified when I post new content, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.